Okay, so I'm going to get going because we have quite a lot of material to cover. So very warm welcome to this open hour. It's one of the many events that the IPCC Focal Point for Italy organizes to run alongside the process of the IPCC Seventh Assessment Report. So every time we have a major milestone being reached or an activity in which you can participate in, we organize these very informal open hours. They're in English. Our interest is to really mobilize awareness and motivate participation in these processes and try to explain how to participate. So today we'll be talking about the expert review of the short-lived climate forces methodology report. And I'm just going to introduce very, very briefly the focal point for Italy. So the role of the focal point, as you may be aware, is to connect national expertise, national research activities and technical communities and the policymaking communities with the IPCC process. And as focal points, we represent Italy in the IPCC plenary session, so the intergovernmental body. And we also do a lot of outreach and activities like this, but also talking about the results when the reports are published. So I support Antonio Navarra, who is the focal point and the alternate. And working with me is Marta Elena, Mauro Bonocore, Martina Menga, Roberta Baria, who's here with us on the call, and the communications team from CMCC. And we have a very nice website, which is actually in Italian. We do translate a lot of the material into Italian. Yeah, I mean, it's since I think 2015, if I'm not mistaken, that we are running this part of the activity of the Ministry of the Environment and Energy Security of Italy. And we're very fortunate, I think, as a research institution, CMCC is a research institution, to be able to support the science policy interface for Italy as a whole in this way. So today, sorry, I've just managed to click the link in my presentation. So you'll receive these slides afterwards. You'll have all the information, including the linked information that you see in there. So today I'm really, really happy to welcome two very special guests. So we have Giacomo Grassi, who's working at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission in Italy, and Maria Jose Sanchez, working at BC3 in Spain. They are both elected bureau members of the Task Force on Greenhouse Gas Inventories. So they are the European elected representatives. And it's really special, I think, to have them join us because they're going to help me explain more about the TFI's work, the task force work, and you'll hear more about what this methodology report is about, so that you can, as effectively as possible, engage in this process. So I'll just give a very brief introduction into the IPCC and its expert review. And then I'll hand over to Giacomo to talk to you about what the Task Force on Greenhouse Gas Inventory does. And then Maria Jose will talk about the report itself and the expectations for this expert review. And then we obviously have questions and answers. As this is a webinar format, you will see that there is a question and answers box. So please do drop in your questions and we'll answer them in writing or during the discussion. And if we don't get them through, the hour, we'll collect them and we'll provide some questions afterwards along with the recording and slides. So very, very quickly, just to remind you what the work plan of the seventh assessment cycle of the IPCC is, you see that there's a series of products and they're all underway now, except for the final synthesis reports. But the Task Force on Greenhouse Gas Inventories is producing two methodology reports, one on short-lived climate forces that will be out by 2027, and then one on carbon capture utilization and carbon dioxide removal technologies, also coming out by that end of 2027. And then in parallel, we have the special report on climate change in cities, which has also recently had its expert review. So that process is well underway, and the working group reports have just started their work now. So this summer, it'll be the time for the expert review of the main reports. And then finally, there's the synthesis reports, which will be produced by 2029. So just to remind, the IPCC is really quite a special, unique science policy interface. And the products that the IPCC delivers are neutral with respect to policy choices. So there's it's imperative to maintain this neutrality rather than being prescriptive to policy choices. So the IPCC serves an international science policy interface. Clearly, the IPCC does not carry out its own research. It's actually assessing the knowledge that's out there, so assessing published literature, data, and so on. And the scientists and experts that participate are bringing their expertise to understand and communicate what we know from the published literature. So it's an expert-led assessment. And these reports, all of them, go through this cyclical process. When a first draft is ready, we have this milestone where we are now, an expert review is undertaken, and then the authors come back to work on the second draft thanks to this input. And then there is a second government and expert review. So by government experts, government nominated technical experts participate in the review. And then finally, there's a final draft review followed by what's really quite a special process whereby the summary substance is discussed with governments in person during a plenary session. In the case of the working groups, the summary for policymakers is approved line by line. And in the case of the methodology reports, there's an adoption of the overview chapter. And here it is. This is what the situation looks like. It's a dialogue directly with experts, participants of the authorship of the reports, the Task Force Bureau, and governments and their experts. So it's really very interesting process to generate these reports. So as I said, we're here now with the first order draft of the methodology report on short-lived climate forces inventories. And the review has actually already started. So it started in January and it concludes the 27th of February. You can register, and please take note that the deadline to register to participate is the 13th of February, after which it will no longer be possible. The whole purpose of this is to really ensure as balanced and as comprehensive a report as possible. So the author teams are quite small at the end of the day. So we're seeking your input as wider experts to help this process and produce very useful reports. So when you register, you'll be asked to identify which part of the report you would like to contribute to. You can choose all of them, all of the volumes, all of the chapters, or you can select and just focus on a few. And you are asked to share one publication that sort of illustrates your expertise. It can be a peer-reviewed publication, a technical report, anything that's relevant to show that this is the areas that you're working on, and you declare your expertise as relevant. It's a very open process, so I would encourage you to participate. So the reason why you should participate in this review is, as I said, the author teams are quite finite. They're small. It's very difficult for them to cover the breadth of the experience, the technical knowledge, and the publications that are out there. So thanks to your help, this is how the IPCC reports do come through as being particularly policy relevant. And so we need you to bring your expertise and your insights into this. I think it's a very worthwhile exercise to participate in. There's a much lower workload than being an author. So, it's a commitment to become an author of these reports that's not necessarily available in terms of time and so on for everyone, but it makes you very much part of shaping the reports. And you become more familiar also, if this is the first time, with how these reports are written. Just to, in some cases, there may be situations where the contribution made through the expert review is particularly helpful in an area which needs more input. And so in that case, sometimes experts are invited to be contributing authors. And expert reviewers are recognized. So you could have just reviewed a paragraph, a volume, or a chapter, or a section, but all your comments will be responded to by authors. So the chapter team will provide a response. And actually, it's very interesting for you perhaps to know that after the report is concluded, this material will become available, publicly available. So it's a very transparent and comprehensive process. And finally, this is an example of an annex where expert reviewers are recognized in the finished product. So I think it's important that your contribution is recognized. This is what, if you go to the website of one of the methodology reports, you'll find a trace of at certain expert review process. This is what the comments were. Your name and your name is part of the information that's recorded, and then the authors are obliged to respond. So you see, it's a very serious process indeed. And this is what if you go to the Task Force on Greenhouse Gas Inventories website, you can see this particular report, its various iterations, and you'll find all the documentation. So with that, I stop, and I'm going to give the floor now to Giacomo, who's going to explain a little bit more what the Task Force on Greenhouse Gas Inventories does. Thanks, Giacomo.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this excellent presentation. Good afternoon to everyone. Next, I would guide quickly through what is the Task Force and National Greenhouse Inventory, the scope of his work. And then Maria will enter into the details of the methodological report, which is the main focus of this seminar. So this is an overall overview of the IPCC structure. I want to show you that next to the well-known working group 1, 2, and 3, there is this other fourth group of the IPCC, which is less known but not, I would say, less important, which is the Task Force on National Greenhouse Inventory. The reason for creating this IPCC task force roots into the UNFCCC foundation in 1992. On the fact that Article 4.1 refers to the need for parties, for countries to develop periodical update and publish national inventory of anthropogenic emission removal of all greenhouse gases not controlled by the Montreal Protocol, using comparable methodologies agreed by the Conference of the Party. So this is the rationale why IPCC was asked to develop this methodology for anthropogenic emission and removals. Next. The objective of this task force are therefore mainly to develop and refine internationally agreed methodologies with the help of scientists and software for the calculation and reporting of national greenhouse gas inventories, and also to encourage the widespread use of these methodologies under the UNFCCC. The work is managed by 2 elected co-chair and 12 elected bureau members, including Maria and I, supported to a technical support unit based in Japan. Essentially, the task force tried to translate the English say that what we cannot measure, we cannot manage. So helps to start reporting emissions so that it is the reported emission really the fundamental information that is used by climate policy and that's used to assess compliance with the climate target, for example, under the Paris Agreement. Next. The methodological report uses globally standardized methodologies and emission factors to ensure consistency and comparability. But then, of course, country-specific methods can be developed. The process for producing methodological report looks very much like the one followed for producing assessment report. So there are the starting point usually an expert meeting where experts gather to discuss the scientific topic and to see pros and cons, for example, of proceeding with a methodological report, and prepare supporting material essential for the scoping meeting. The scoping meeting, including the IPCC parties, so the country, produce including expert, produce a proposal for the scope and outline of the methodological report. Then the approval session, including all the countries in the IPCC panel, approve and eventually refine what has been the outline proposed in the scoping meeting. And then there is the development of the guidance with regular lead author meetings, typically 4 lead author meetings. And then the review process, which again, which is the focus of this seminar. The review process of the methodological report follow in principle the same say multi-stage expert and government review described by Anna before, that is typical of the working assessment report, working group assessment report. The review of methodological report emphasize the focus is a bit different than working groups, emphasize methodological clarity, the practical applicability, the consistency, the management of uncertainties within the inventory. And then there is the approval session by the IPC panel, which in case of methodology report, as Anna said, include essentially focus on the overview chapter. Next. The IPCC guidelines aim to provide inventory compilers with a set of procedure to estimate greenhouse gas estimates consistent with the so-called TAC reporting principle under the UNFCCC. TAC stands for transparency, accuracy, comparability, consistency, and completeness. These are the 5 golden principles defined under UNFCCC that should be that the IPCC method should help to achieve. And in practice, the IPCC provided a set of procedures, so-called good practice guidance, aimed at ensuring this TAC, including that inventories are clear, accurate, in the sense that they are neither systematically over nor underestimated, and that uncertainties are reduced to the extent practicable, that inventories are comparable among countries, the time series reflect annual actual changes in emissions and not methodological changes over time, and that the inventory do not contain double counting or omissions. In practice, this means that each inventory compiler should select methods appropriate to national circumstances, use higher tiers methods, so tiers that are more complex in terms of input data and methodologies, for the key category. The categories are those that are most relevant within an inventory and should be prioritized. And then there is a sort of procedure to ensure, to achieve quality assurance and quality control procedures, to ensure time series consistency, and to identify, quantifying, and reducing uncertainty where feasible, and then provide transparent documentation so estimates can be understood and reproduced. Next. The current guidance that are mandatory for all parties are the 2006 IPCC guidance, mandatory under UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. The refinement, a refinement of these guidance have been produced in 2019 and can be used on a voluntary basis under the Paris Agreement. And generally, the definition of anthropogenic emission is clear for most sectors. However, there is somehow an exception that for the land sector, disaggregating the anthropogenic emission removal from a natural background is more complex and requires a number of assumptions. This is not the focus of this seminar, so I will not discuss that in more detail. Next. During the 7th assessment report, the methodology report that the TFI has been tasked are essentially 2. One is the short-lived climate forces, the one that Maria will discuss more extensively later, that include atmospheric compounds that, despite their short lifetime compared to long-lived greenhouse gases, have significant impact on climate change. And then another report, which will soon start, is on net emission from carbon dioxide removal technology and carbon capture, utilization, and storage activities. Next. Other ongoing TFI activity include the management of the IPCC software, following a recent update that has been made, and then the management of the emission factor database, and then other supporting activity, including training programs on greenhouse inventory for national experts of developing countries, software demonstration workshop, and then another of other activities, including, for example, an expert meeting on reconciling land use emission, reconcile different estimates on this sector. I conclude next just with this QR code. If you're interested to know more, there are a lot of interesting questions, frequently asked questions for what the IPCC Task Force on National Inventory does and how the different sector has some specificity. So if you have more curiosity, I encourage you to visit this website. With that, I have concluded. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Giacomo. That was a really nice overview. And this very useful site, I was looking through it just before the webinar. I think we'll hyperlink it from our webinar page. It's very useful indeed. So I don't see any specific questions coming up about the task force itself. So without further ado, Maria Jose, I give the floor to you, and you can walk us through the work on short-lived climate forces. Thank you.
Thank you, Erna. So I will elaborate more on the one of the assessment on one of the methodological reports. Next slide, please. Yeah, as Giacomo indicated, we had two methodological reports in the 7th cycle, and I will focus on the one which is already open for review, the first of the draft, which is the short-lived climate forces. As you can see here, it's been a long trip for finally deciding and starting to do these short gases. One of the reasons is because it's not easy to measure short gases, because originally was thought that they may have not a very big impact on climate change, but after IPCC evolved on assessment reports, it was clear and becoming more clear that they were important gases. So the venture of this started in 2018 with an expert meeting, exploratory expert meeting in Geneva, and then certainly on the IPCC 49 in Japan. Well, it was decided that it was needed to produce a methodological report. And then we started a process that was longer than usual, which is technical analysis to prepare three expert meetings, indeed, that were online to identify which gases, potential list categories, and so on. And I will explain a little bit later. And the cycle of the IPCC, the 7th cycle, started with the re-election in IPCC 59, and then was when actually the serious work on the scoping meeting and starting the work of producing the drafts and the review process was started. And it's expected that we will finish on 2027. Next slide. So it's important to know what the origin is. In the first meeting, these short gases are very much linked to air pollution. So the community of air pollution also produced guidance for air pollutants to measure air pollutants in the air. And this is the EMEP guidebook that provides for the long-range transport convention on air pollution. It provides ways to measure actually pollutants in the air, not emissions, but pollutants in the air. As well as for some emissions, but there were some gaps identified, and this was discussed in this meeting in 2018, and we found that there were gaps on combustion of biofuels for transportation, cooking, heating, open burning of waste, traditional coke and charcoal production, brick kilns, kerosene lamps, flaring, residential coal burning, and so on and so on. And in particular, there were big gaps on emissions of non-methanogenic volatile organic compounds and biogenic volatile compounds that were coming fundamentally the latest from the agriculture sector. Next slide. So finally, in 2021, there was a virtual meeting where those compounds that were short-lived forces needed to be assessed were decided, and that was on aerosols. It was black carbon and organic carbon, and then there was a large bunch of precursors of ozone, of tropospheric ozone, and aerosol precursors that were nitrate oxides, carbon monoxide, non-methanogenic volatile organic compounds, and also volatile organic compounds, and sulfur dioxide, and of course also ammonia. Some of them were already dealt with. Ammonia, for example, was sort of dealt with in some indirect measurements for the GHG inventories, but not completely. So the biggest discussion in this meeting was actually how to derive black carbon and organic carbon emissions from and it was the way that was done in the atmosphere from actually the particulate matter 2.5. That was something that was measured by the Long Range Transport Convention. It took a long time to start measuring PM 2.5, but now we have better data. So actually one big discussion in this meeting was if we should also report PM 2.5 for transparency reasons in case that the method for evaluating black carbon and organic carbon was based on the fraction of PM2.5. So that's the list. So next slide, please. So in the third meeting, what it was decided that we took a stock of also what was produced. It was in 2022, so the sixth assessment cycle was completed, and we got the information from the IPCC working groups, fundamentally on the working group 1, on the role of those short-lived gases on the warming, and therefore we took this information and take them into account and start discussing on the definitions, the relevance for a climate-related inventory, how to apply that in a general inventory, how to refine the inventories based on inclusion of those gases, and also if it was possible or not to do a key category analysis and uncertainty analysis of all gases together, so the long life and with a short life. And there were some decisions taken there, or some recommendations. The first one is that most PCOC emission estimate have to start with PM2.5, which we knew from the previous meetings. And obviously, it will be good, or it will be desirable to also report PM2.5. That also it was important that for reporting non-methanogenic VOC is needed the total mass of volatile organic compounds. That also we need to prioritize the source category considering all short gases, and those were PCOC, NOx, SO2, ammonia, and then the non-methanogenic VOCs and CO. It was also clear that it was not recommended to use metrics to compare long life with short life. That was really not something useful. And also that do a combined key category analysis was not either a good idea. And finally, well, it was also clear that it's a national estimates at minimum and on the annual basis. That was another conclusion. And well, there was no need to, in this case, to prescribe long time series. So there's no need to go back to 1990. And the sources of emissions are very variable, and therefore it's not really worth to do a long time series. And then it's also important to have large granularity for regional and in some cases also for the climatic variables that are influencing those emissions. Higher tiers and granular development of tier 1 is important, but of course it will be costly, and that also impacts actually the capacities of small and developing countries, and therefore this need to be considered when developing the methodological report. Next slide.
Maria, can I interrupt you? There's just a question. Maybe you can just clarify the point.
Sure.
There's a question if you can share the definition of black carbon compared to organic carbon. If you can provide a clarification.
Yeah, black carbon are particles that are out of combustion, but they are mineral. And organic carbon are or still organic compounds in the particles. So this is the basic difference. So when you have a PM2.5 fraction, you have a fraction of organic and black carbon in these particles. It's very well known in the air pollution community, but unfortunately, measuring black carbon and organic carbon in particles is very recent. So maybe we have 10 years of data or something like that in most of the countries, and much less in others. US had reasonable data. Europe has also data now since the daughter directives were adopted for PM2.5.
Perfect, thank you.
So anyway, we finally reached 2024, and then after all the recommendations of the expert meeting, it was done the scoping meeting, which is something common for all products of IPCC. And in the scoping meeting, basically what you have to provide is a title and format of the report, terms of reference, table of contents, and then instructions to experts and authors on how to do the job, because that is like an annotated outline that allows the experts to focus on what actually expert meetings were were most concentrated on, and that helps not to start from scratch. Well, the title was decided. It was in the scoping. I will see that later it didn't survive all. But the title was 2027 Supplement for the 2006 IPCC Guidelines for National Greenhouse Gas Inventories, Short-Lived Climate Forces, 2027 Supplement for, this is the short acronym, is 2027 Supplement for SLCFs. The format was to be originally a supplement, actually, of the existing guidance, right? And then it had an outline with through chapters, and then the TORs that has several annexes, the table of contents, the instructions to authors, the work plan, and the supplement of supporting material that describes the categories and the species. This scoping report was provided to the next slide, IPCC plenary. Next. Yeah, and then the IPCC plenary took the decision to adopt, and the decision was to prepare a methodological report with the following title: 2027 IPCC Methodological Report on Inventories for Short-Lived Climate Forces. So the title was changed slightly during the plenary discussions, and it was seen as a standing alone report and not a supplement to the existing guidance. And then there was an agreement on the terms of reference and also on the total budget for the production of the methodological report. Next. So what we need to know or to focus on? Well, first on the terms of reference, the coverage, right? So it is important that we aim to have what is called tier 1, which means something that everyone can estimate, right? The simple way to estimate. And then we can move to tier 2, which is more country specific, and tier 3, which may be more complicated, for example, including modeling approaches. So the tier 1 methodological approach, indeed, it needs to be having a relative contribution to the global and regional emissions of the species. Regarding to a species, it was clear that we included what it was recommended: NOx, CO, non-methanogenic volatile organic compounds, SO2, ammonia, BC, and OC, right? As well as primary particulate emissions, so PM, relevant to the radiative forcing. And here it was a discussion about, first of all, if we are obliged to, so it's one more species to report, PM 2.5, if it's PM 2.1, and finally it was decided in a way to leave more freedom to the authors to see how to reflect that. And that's why it says, as well as emissions of primary particulate matter relevant for radiative forcing as appropriate. And it was another species discussed, which it was also mentioned in the latest IPCC assessment reports, which was the hydrogen, because hydrogen is becoming a very important gas now because it's used as a vector for energy. And it was also decided that we could not force to do or estimate hydrogen, but it was very important to ask IPCC Working Group 1 to revise the relevance of hydrogen, because in the future we may need actually to go back and do something for hydrogen as well. Next slide.
I'm going to stop you again. There's just a couple of questions. One of them is really particularly related to what you just said. So there's a question as why are there country differences in measuring carbon molecules or components? It sounds like the same objectives we're measuring. Why are there country differences among the tiers?
Well, because the capacities, in some cases, developed countries usually have more capacities to move to tier 2, where they have country-specific sector emission factors. While developing countries that are starting to build GHG inventories and they didn't have strong obligations until the Paris Agreement, they are still building their inventory. So they start with tier 1. And the idea is that they could slowly move to tier 2. And then less developing countries, usually they don't have the capacity to use higher tiers. So the intention here is that you have sort of consistent estimations for all countries, right? So that you don't discourage countries to produce the inventory because it's too complicated. So that's the idea behind the tiers. So the tier 1, basically the report itself provides the emission factor. So there are tables of emission factors that can be sort of, you can identify by your region. This is based on literature, usually. But at least you have one emission factor that you can use. If you move to tier 2, you develop your own emission factor, usually. And in some cases, you can go to models if you have very strong capacities. So this is why the tier approach is there.
Yeah, thanks. And there's a question about where SLCF data that is not from small or developed countries available. Is there national data that's public? Do you know?
Well, usually what the data that the countries have to provide in any case is the activity data that is multiplied by the emission factor. Emission factors can be produced more generalistically, and then you can try to say, okay, my conditions respond to this particular tier 1. But the activity data needs to be provided by you, because imagine if you have, I don't know, several sources of particles, for example, no? Several processes that are, you need to know which processes, and you need to know if it's a combustion, you need to know how much are you burning, right? So that's in essence why activity data has to be given always by the country, but the emission factors you can select among certain factors that more or less mirror your conditions, and then you can use this tier 1 with your activity data. This is how usually works.
Okay, thanks. And I think that also addressed Same's question. If you don't think so, Same, please write again. And there's a question which I let you go on now because you're going to describe the content of the report. But I just say what the question is, and maybe you come back to it. The question is, can data from short-lived climate forces be reconciled with data from Earth observations or remote sensing? And do the guidelines contain these methods as well? I don't know if this is something you can maybe share.
For some, yes, you can combine some remote sensing new sensors that are able. For example, in this report, methane is not included because it's included in the inventories already. But if you look at SO, for example, you could use some remote sensors for identifying sources of SO. This is something that will be included if we found methods that can be applied in a consistent manner, and there is data available to do that. They will be included in the guidance. Remote sensors are more and more included now in the methodological guidance for land, for example, for identifying land areas, activity data, but also in some cases for point sources, for example, they are used.
Okay, thanks. I'll let you go on. Sorry.
So anyway, here you have the table of contents. Every single report has an overview chapter, which is what is adopted at the end, as Giacomo indicated. And here in the overview general guidance, we have, the overview is the first one, is very short, and then the volume 1 is the general guidance. In the general guidance, you always have approaches for data collection, guidance uncertainties, methodological choice, so some general guidance on how you approach every single sector, right? And this includes these sections always, no? Data collection, uncertainties, methodological choice, and key source analysis, time series consistency, which in this case is not so relevant because we don't need that long time series, as I said earlier, and then QA/QC and verification. And finally, there is some reporting tables provided so that it helps you to actually gather the data and report the data, although the actual inventory reporting tables are produced by the convention itself, so then you have to match both of them, and this is partially what the IPCC software does now for the other guidance. Next slide. And then there is volumes by sector: the energy sector, the industrial processes sector, the agriculture and other land uses, forestry and other land uses sector, and the waste sector. And here For the energy sector, we only will look into the stationary combustion, so source focal point sources, mobile combustion, which is mostly transport, fugitive emissions, and any other thing that is identified that can have emissions of those gases that we mentioned earlier. In the industrial processes, it's fundamentally mineral industry, chemical industry, metal industry, and non-energy products, fuels and solvent use. And in the AFOLU sector, we have always the same issues with consistent land representation. And here we'll focus on mostly on livestock and manure management, and a little bit land use categories and more managed soils as well. And on the waste for solid waste disposal, biological treatment of solid waste, and interaction and open burning of waste, incineration, and open burning of waste, and waste water treatment and discharge. Next slide, please. So that's the table of contents with some annotations in there. Then authors were selected. So after IPCC 61, selection of authors were done. 412 nominations were received, and based on those nominations, the Task Force Bureau considered what is the expertise of the nominated experts on the topic, or previous IPCC experience on GHG inventories, inventory guidelines, geographical distribution, and gender balance. And finally, 122 experts were selected, 10 coordinated lead authors, which are the ones that sort of coordinate volumes and chapters, 10 review editors, 2 per 5 volumes, and 102 lead authors. And this is a number which we started. Then you may have some people, few people dropped and so on, but in essence, this is what we had. This is at the end, the current number we have is 143 authors. Some drop. We had to identify contributing authors for filling gaps, and finally we have 143 authors. Usually, the IPCC provides travel support to developing countries, but not to developed countries. So if you are an author from a developed country, you have to cover, or your government has to cover your expense. And then even during the first steps of the production of the report, we still can identify contributing authors if we found that there is gaps, and either way are identified by the authors themselves or by the steering committee of the report. Usually, I mean, the author meetings are in person. As you can imagine, it's a very complex document, so it's better and has some cross-cutting issues across chapters. So usually it's in person. If it's not all the way, where sometimes it's an hybrid format also, so some authors can connect online. But that makes things more complicated. Next. So this is the next slide, please. So this is the first author meeting that took place in Bilbao, and there, basically, we introduced the IPCC process to the authors that didn't have any experience on IPCC. Then we started the elaboration of the chapters outlines with the coordinating lead authors and the lead authors' presence. There are also initial discussion on the literature variability and identification of existing literature. And then it was also an assignment of the work within the chapter author team. So the coordinating lead authors were assigning parts of the chapters to different lead authors. And finally, there was also an identification of the gaps. We have gaps of expertise for some chapters and look for some solution to that. And this is why we have now 143, because some contributing authors were included. Next, please. So the second, they were working on in between the two. The authors were working, so they came in October 2025 to Istanbul, where actually there was a check of the advance on the production of the drafting for the first of the draft. And they were also starting to work very seriously on the development of the default emission factors, the factors for tier 1. Also identifying cross-cutting issues, and then identifying or closing the work plan for until after LAM2. Obviously, after LAM2, the first of the draft has to be produced. So the deadline for that was January 2026. And this is what this is the draft which is now out for expert review. Next. So here, what you have is, or what you can engage now. If you want to engage an IPCC methodological report, you can do it now. The first of the draft is already there, out there. Well, it was an attempt to also make a, very information around to say that there was going to be this expert review of the first of the draft, but it's open now from 5 of January to 27 of February. And you have some of the links here. Next. So just to provide you a little bit more on what you may find if you decide to review this. Well, what you will find basically is that the total number of pages is 1691. So it's a quite large draft, where more or less, the volumes we have more is, which was expected, the industrial processes volume. But when you go to register, you can register and select one volume, for example. So you don't need to do the whole report. You can decide to select one of the volumes, or even chapters within the volume. So it's not that you need to do the whole thing. My recommendation is that if you want to select one volume, always select also the general volume, because that helps a lot also to put in context what the volume says, where you may be expert on. Next. So this is the timeline. In gray is what is already we're already covered. So now we have these 8 weeks of review, and we will have the third lead author meeting in 24th of April in Rome. And there what we will do is take all the comments that were submitted and incorporate the comments as appropriate, which basically means that we have to respond every single comment, how it's been incorporated, if it is incorporated or not, and why. And this is going to be public, as Anna said at the beginning. This is a very important task, and this is where the review editors come into the place. The review editors are there to assure that this process is going to be done like this, right? So that all comments are answered and everything is thought very thoroughly, and provide very clear arguments for whatever decision is made by authors. So about 13th of July, we will have the second of the draft, right? And that will be published for review. It's a very important date, is August 24th, because that is where we will cut the literature. We will say after 24th of August, no new literature will be incorporated. So if any literature is relevant, it's important to ensure that this is addressed or known by the authors before the 24th of August. And finally, it will be between 31st of August and 26th of October, the government and expert review for 8 weeks again. And the fourth lead author meeting will be in March 2027. And that will be to assess the comments of the second order draft. In this second order draft is important because it's governments also commenting. It's not only experts. For the first, it's only experts. For the second order draft, it's also governments. So the review editors have to be very, very clear that all comments need to be addressed. And then 15th of July 2027, the final draft will be published for review. Then it's going to be a government review alone for 8 weeks again. And in December 2027, IPCC plenary will adopt the final draft. So that's the timetable. Next.
I'm going to jump in again, actually, Maria, because there were some questions before at the beginning that were essentially asking things like what's the work plan for an expert review, whether there's training. I just think we need to maybe clarify a little bit what is intended by this review process. So I would just say that it's access of part of the report, so the PDF, where all the pages are line numbered, so you can actually comment in between, such line and another line. You have a comment on the specific substance of that report.
Yes.
Just to clarify, it's like reviewing a document.
It's like reviewing a peer review. It's a peer review process. Let's put it like this, like an article. But it's important that you will have a confidentiality agreement, so you cannot disclose the drafts until the final adoption of the IPCC. Meaning that if you become expert reviewer, your responsibility is not to disclose draft, right? And the reason for that is because this is not final, right? And unfortunately, this has been happening in the past, that some people were disclosing parts of reports that were not finalized, and this can be misinterpretations. It's very, very important not to disclose. The reason why the expert review is important is because we cannot have everyone in the writing, right? But we need to guarantee that as much as the knowledge we have is taken into account. And for that, the first expert review is fundamental because it's the first of the draft. So it's very important that we actually get comments from experts that know very well their fields, and that can enrich the writing by the authors. It's also very important that on the second review, experts and governments, because actually experts will go to a second refinement of the text, and that's very important to see if actually the authors were doing what it was expected from the comments and so on. And the governments start there to actually see if, what they look for is if it's implementable, right? So when you get comments from the governments, you get comments most of the times for inventory compilers. So it's a cross-check, which is extremely important because it's the compiler who will tell you, look, that what you are saying, it has this or this problem, or this data is more difficult, or so it helps you actually also to refine some aspects to make this workable, right? And finally, the governments are the ones that will adopt in the plenary. So it's good to know or to have comments from governments so that you guarantee that when you go to the plenary, every single concern is being reflected and properly addressed. And this is why it's also extremely important that all these comment tables are publicly available, because that means that anyone, even people that is not an expert, can look and see how comments are being addressed. And if anything is not being addressed, it can be discussed in the next round, or it can be actually, if it's extremely important in the plenary, it can be raised. Although, as we said, the adoption is the overview chapter.
Yeah, thanks for that, Maria. I think it's important to emphasize 2 points. One is that as an expert reviewer, you're bringing your expertise, your knowledge. So really don't do editorial comments. And think that these processes generate many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of review comments. So be judicious in how you contribute your comments, and try to be very constructive. So to include a proposed solution, shall we say, for the issue that you've identified. And the other is the confidentiality dimension. I think this is very important, needs to be repeated. Like the authors, when you become an expert reviewer, you also join in, shall we say, this confidentiality of the material as it's been developed. It's very important not to share widely these draft documents, since they can be revised quite substantively. And being an IPCC draft, it can be perceived as an IPCC document, and so can generate quite a lot of confusion. So it's really become part of the drafting process by registering as an expert reviewer, and it's in that spirit that you engage. It's not to just access the draft or share and discuss more broadly the issues with others. So I hope that's quite clear. Thanks, Maria. I give you back the floor and carry on.
Yes, no, next slide, you can just jump to. Next. Yeah, this is a very synthetic illustration of the work plan, so that I thought it was good to have a very simple one rather than too much words. But here you have all the lamps, and you have the dates, and you have the cycle better prepared, better informed, right? Next, this is my final one. So remember, from 5th of January till 27th of February, so you still have time to register, and you need to register in this link if you want to become an expert. The registration was already open the 1st of December of 2025 until the 10th of January. So, well, maybe not for registering again, but this is already closed. But pay attention to the other methodological reports or the next review, which is also experts and governments. Please don't forget that if you are being registered, send your comments before the 27th of February. They provide templates in Excel so that you can put your comments in the template, usually saying volume, chapter, page, and line. This is the way it's organized. Or you can also comment the figures by mentioning the figure. The instructions are very clear, so you won't have any problem on that. And this is all what I can say on this report. Have fun if you are already registered for an expert review. Otherwise, pay attention for the next ones.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria. That was a very comprehensive journey through the process of developing such a methodology report. And I hope there's enough information for everyone on the call to think about where you might be able to find out, where you can contribute. There was a question about the links and information that you'll have access to these slides. We'll make them available alongside the recording. So on the Focal Point website, we'll also distribute this information after the call to those who couldn't make it in person but had registered, of course. I just wanted to see if Giacomo had any final words, motivation words to participate. You've been very patiently listening in and being a resource available to our meeting. So.
I have a final recommendation.
Oh, go for it.
The authors are public, so you know which is author. If you have relevant documentation, papers that you believe are relevant to the outline that you just saw, and you have, or you know one author, please let him know that you have this information. That's is going to be extremely important because this is a very new field for the inventory, and it's difficult sometimes to find enough expert knowledge. So air pollution experts are also very relevant in this context. Thank you.
My only final word of motivation is that don't think that being a reviewer is a minor role. It's fundamental within the IPCC philosophy because the review process allows to build, to construct a shared knowledge, both in the assessment report and methodological report. So this double check, this independent check is fundamental in the IPCC philosophy. So your contribution on that is needed if you wish to provide that.
And maybe, Giacomo, to add that you mentioned the emission factor database, which is another avenue for enrich the emission factors that are not in the reports themselves, because reports sometimes are updated, but it takes quite a long time. So the emission factor database is also to ensure that we collect the emission factors on a more regular basis that can be made available for people to justify how, but they still need to justify how to use it anyway.
Okay, and with that, thank you very much for your time, Maria and Giacomo. Thank you all also to giving your time to joining this open hour, and good luck with the process. I hope you engage and keep following the news from the Focal Point of Italy. We will be available with other information sources and webinars as we go along in the IPCC process, and you're very welcome to join. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Anna. Thank you.